At 7:15 on June 15, 1944, a German 105mm howitzer battery belonging to the 716th Static Infantry Division began firing on British troops advancing from Sword Beach near Caen, France. The battery had taken up its position since early morning. According to standard German procedures, crews were supposed to fire 3 to 5 shells and then immediately relocate before Allied artillery observers could identify their location. The battery commander issued the order to open fire. The crews loaded their guns, aimed, and released 3 rounds each, 12 shells in total, arcing toward British lines roughly 3,000 meters away. As soon as the last round was fired, the commander shouted for the unit to stop firing and get ready to move. The men began their practiced routine, removing the trail spades, securing remaining ammunition, attaching the guns to their prime movers. But before they could finish, American artillery struck. The noise arrived first, like the violent tearing of cloth amplified thousands of times. The shells descended from several directions at once. This wasn't a creeping barrage stepping across the terrain, nor a staggered bombardment where different batteries fired in sequence. Every shell landed within a 3-second window. It was a time-on-target strike. The initial volley obliterated 2 of the howitzers. The next wave killed the battery commander and 7 of his soldiers. A third blast detonated the ammunition supply. The unit was wiped out as a functioning force. The interval between the last German round fired and the first American shells hitting their position was under 5 minutes.
The armor-piercing round left the barrel at 853 meters per second, covering the 120-meter gap between the tanks faster than Hoffman could blink. It slammed into the Panther's frontal turret armor. The 100mm thick plate armor that had shrugged off countless Sherman hits in France and Belgium split apart on impact. The 90mm projectile, still holding immense kinetic force, punched through the interior of the tank before detonating inside. The balance of the war was no longer determined simply by strategies and battlefield maps, it was being decided by industrial output, weapon design, and sudden frontline encounters that shattered everything these German soldiers believed about their machines, their army, and their nation. For years, the myth of German armored superiority had been etched into the war in steel and blood, ever since the first Tiger I rolled into combat near Leningrad in August 1942. This same pattern unfolded over and over across Normandy during June and July of 1944. German artillery units that had performed successfully in Poland, France, and on the Eastern Front suddenly found themselves unable to stay alive in the Normandy campaign. The United States had created a counter-battery system capable of detecting German artillery positions and unleashing concentrated fire far faster than German doctrine had ever considered achievable. This challenge wasn't a new one. Artillery had been the deadliest arm on the battlefield since the American Civil War. Locating and eliminating enemy gun positions, known as counter-battery fire, had been a primary objective of armies for generations. But carrying it out with real efficiency required overcoming 3 major problems that no military had fully solved before 1944. The first obstacle was identifying where the enemy's guns were located. Artillery installations were usually hidden behind hills, buried in wooded areas, or placed in defilade, where they couldn't be seen directly. Detecting them required technical techniques first developed during World War I. Sound ranging systems used microphones to determine gun locations by measuring the sound of their muzzle blasts. Flash spotting relied on pre-surveyed observation posts that could draw precise directional lines toward a gun's muzzle flash. Aerial reconnaissance used spotter aircraft to view positions from above. All these methods were effective, but they were slow. Pinpointing a battery typically took anywhere from 15 to 30 minutes. By that time, if the enemy followed proper displacement procedures, the guns would already be gone. The second problem was computing firing data for one's own artillery. Range, azimuth, elevation, propellant charge all had to be calculated while factoring in wind, temperature, barrel wear, altitude, and even the temperature of the propellant itself. Each gun required its own individualized calculations. Even with well-trained crews, processing a fire mission for a single battery using traditional techniques took about 5 to 8 minutes. The third challenge was coordinating several artillery batteries at once. Bringing together the firepower of dozens of guns onto one target required extremely precise organization. Older methods demanded that every unit use the exact same maps, share matched survey information for pinpointing each battery's location, and rely on forward observers who maintained direct communication with all firing units. Each battery had to compute its own firing data separately and would fire only when its calculations were complete. From the moment the target was found to the moment shells finally struck, a large-scale artillery mission usually took between 30 and 40 minutes. That 30 to 40-minute delay gave the enemy more than enough time to relocate. German doctrine, shaped by years of fighting on the Eastern Front, revolved around shoot-and-scoot tactics: fire a small number of rounds, quickly shift to another position, then fire again. Constant movement was the best defense against counter-battery strikes. If you kept relocating, the enemy's return fire would always hit an empty patch of ground. The United States completely changed the equation. By June 1944, American artillery units were capable of launching massive counter-battery fire within 6 to 9 minutes after a target was detected, sometimes even faster. From the instant a German gun fired until the moment American shells crashed onto that position, less time passed than it took for a German crew to attach a howitzer to its towing vehicle. This transformation was made possible by an innovation that originated not on a battlefield but in a classroom at an artillery training school in Oklahoma 15 years earlier. In 1930, the U.S. Army Field Artillery School at Fort Sill, Oklahoma confronted a major doctrinal issue. On January 15, 1945, at the New York port of embarkation, the first shipment of 20 M26 Pershings was quietly loaded onto transport ships under the cover of night and strict security. Each tank was sealed in waterproof coverings and labeled with misleading shipping codes. The crews chosen to operate these new tanks had been secretly training at Fort Knox since November, bound by strict confidentiality and threatened with court-martial if they disclosed anything. Their Atlantic crossing lasted 11 days through waters heavily patrolled by U-boats. The Pershings were stored deep in the ship's holds behind rows of standard Shermans, hidden even from most of the vessel's crew. During the entire voyage, the tank crews reviewed German armor identification manuals and rehearsed the false story they were required to give if questioned about their new vehicle. Artillery doctrine emphasized concentrating the fire of several batteries onto a single objective. This approach, first established during World War I, became routine across all major armies. The difficulty, however, was that the traditional process was slow and overly complex. Coordinating massed fire required significant preparation. Every battery had to use the exact same maps. Each battery needed accurate survey information pinpointing their precise location. Every battery also depended on a forward observer who maintained direct communication with them. When a fire mission was issued, every battery worked out its own firing data separately and fired once its calculations were complete. As a result, shells landed on the target gradually over several minutes, allowing the enemy time to find cover. Major Carlos Brewer, who headed the gunnery department at Fort Sill, recognized these weaknesses. Brewer was a career artillery officer who had served during World War I, and he understood that future battles would demand artillery support that was far quicker and far more adaptable. He and his team of instructors introduced a groundbreaking idea known as the Fire Direction Center. Rather than each battery performing its own calculations, this system centralized the process at the battalion level or higher. A specialized group of experts would handle all firing computations using detailed firing tables, pre-calculated data, and instant communication with every subordinate battery. When a fire request was received, the Fire Direction Center would determine the firing data for all batteries at the same moment and issue unified firing orders to each gun simultaneously. In the spring of 1931, the gunnery department at Fort Sill successfully showcased massed battalion fire using this innovative system. On February 26, 1945, near Elsdorf, Germany, the Pershing suffered its first combat loss. The T-26E3 known as Fireball was destroyed in a close-quarters ambush by a Tiger I. The Tiger's 88mm round penetrated the Pershing's gun mantlet, killing the gunner and loader. However, American maintenance teams recovered the damaged Pershing and restored it to operational condition by March 7, an illustration of the superior repair and recovery systems supporting U.S. armored forces. During the following week, scattered reports began filtering into German headquarters about confrontations with an unidentified American tank. These accounts described a vehicle with a noticeably longer cannon and much heavier armor than the familiar Sherman. One Panther crew reported being eliminated at a distance of 1,800 meters by a single shot from an American tank they could not classify. Most alarming of all, every report emphasized the same feature: a gun that appeared far larger and significantly longer than the Sherman's standard 75mm weapon. On March 6, 1945, the tank battle in Cologne Cathedral Square unfolded, an engagement that would become the most extensively documented tank duel of the entire war, filmed on location by U.S. Signal Corps cameraman Jim Bates. The day began with German forces positioning the last of their surviving tanks around the cathedral grounds. Wilhelm Bartelborth, commanding a Panther from Panzer Brigade 106, felt a reinforced sense of confidence as the Americans advanced. The wide-open cathedral plaza provided excellent fields of fire, and the rubble piles around them offered partial hull-down protection. At 15:20 hours, Bartelborth detected movement near the wreckage of the ruined Hotel Geryon. Through his periscope, he spotted what he initially believed to be an unusual Sherman variant equipped with an extended main gun. Immediately, he ordered his gunner to open fire at a distance of 300 meters, effectively point-blank range for the Panther's high velocity. They synchronized a total of 24 artillery pieces from 3 separate batteries so they could strike a single target at the exact same moment. The test was a complete success. As a result, the Army officially integrated the Fire Direction Center system into its standard operating doctrine. However, what existed in manuals did not always match the realities of battlefield execution. To make fire direction centers function properly, the Army needed skilled crews, the right tools, and most critically, a collection of pre-prepared firing information that removed the need for slow mathematical work during combat. The U.S. developed what became known as graphical firing tables. Artillery specialists at Fort Sill produced unique chartboards filled with pre-calculated firing solutions for every imaginable combination of distance, gun elevation, propellant temperature, air density, and wind. When a fire request arrived, the Fire Direction Center simply placed a calibrated straightedge between the battery's location and the target on the map, read the firing data directly from the chart, and relayed the instructions to the gun crews. No math had to be done on the spot. The full procedure required only 2 to 3 minutes. Other nations also used firing tables, but the American version was far more detailed and much quicker to operate. British systems still demanded mental calculations. German systems required the use of logarithms. Soviet systems involved consulting several separate charts. The American graphical approach surpassed all of them in speed. The next major advancement was communications. Fire direction centers depended on dependable links to forward observers and all firing batteries. The U.S. Army invested significantly in radios engineered specifically for controlling artillery fire. By 1941, each American artillery battalion operated multiple radio networks connecting observers, fire direction centers, and gun units together. The third breakthrough was training. German crews began referring to these vehicles as long-gun Shermans, unable to fathom that the Americans had fielded a completely new heavy tank. This misinterpretation persisted for weeks, contributing to tactical mistakes as German crews attempted to engage Pershings using obsolete anti-Sherman strategies. The Panzerwaffen's training infrastructure struggled to respond. Tank schools had no information on the new American tanks, recognition charts were non-existent, and tactical manuals still assumed that American tank guns could not pierce German heavy armor frontally. By mid-March 1945, roughly 20 Pershings were operational in the European theater, with additional units arriving weekly. While this number was small compared to the thousands of Shermans in service, their psychological impact far exceeded their numerical presence. German tank crews, previously confident in engaging Shermans with near impunity, now approached every encounter with uncertainty. Kill ratios tell part of the story. In the limited clashes where Pershings faced German armor, the results were overwhelmingly in favor of the Americans, even if the small sample size of just 20 tanks makes broader statistical conclusions difficult.
The first time the Americans employed time on target in actual combat was during the Guadalcanal campaign in 1943 under the command of General J. L. Collins. By the time of the Normandy invasion, American forces had perfected the technique into a highly efficient system unmatched by any other military. An American infantry company under attack could request artillery support and have multiple battalions, potentially dozens of guns from across an entire corps sector, execute a time-on-target mission within 9 minutes. In other words, only 9 minutes would pass from the initial radio call to the moment shells landed simultaneously on the target. This was not theoretical, it was documented repeatedly in real combat situations. However, fire direction centers executing time-on-target missions addressed only part of the counter-battery problem. They enabled American artillery to concentrate fire almost instantly once a target was known, but they did not solve the more difficult challenge, locating enemy artillery positions in the first place. This required specialized target acquisition techniques that had been developed during World War I and refined over the next 25 years. Sound ranging, flash spotting, and aerial observation were core methods, with radar added by 1944. Sound ranging systems detected artillery guns by capturing sound waves from firing through multiple microphones and using triangulation to calculate the precise location. The British pioneered this method during World War I, and by World War II, American sound ranging units employed electronic equipment capable of plotting enemy gun positions on a map within 3 to 5 minutes of detecting their fire. Flash spotting involved observing muzzle flashes from guns using pre-surveyed observation posts at multiple locations. Observers reported the bearings to each flash, and the Fire Direction Center calculated the intersection points of these lines to pinpoint the enemy gun positions accurate.
Ammunition storage incorporated wet stowage systems to prevent fires, a feature German tanks desperately lacked. Even minor details, such as padded surfaces and interior lighting, showed a level of attention to crew comfort that German designs had long sacrificed. Knowledge of American heavy tank capabilities spread rapidly throughout the panzer forces, further weakening morale already strained by continuous retreats and material shortages. Tank crews, who had maintained fighting spirit despite overwhelming odds, now faced a new reality: the Americans had removed their final advantage. German tactical doctrine had been built around the assumption of technical superiority to offset numerical inferiority. Defensive positions were chosen under the belief that Tigers and Panthers could engage American tanks at ranges where return fire would be ineffective. Offensive operations assumed German heavy tanks could punch through American defenses with acceptable losses. Both of these assumptions were now in serious doubt. The psychological impact manifested in increasing reports of mechanical failures leading to tank abandonment. Crews who would have previously attempted field repairs under fire now labeled vehicles irreparable at the first sign of trouble. Tank recovery units found German tanks abandoned with minor issues, loose tracks, empty fuel tanks, or thrown treads that crews would have normally repaired weeks earlier. As American forces advanced toward the Rhine in late March 1945, German tank crews were placed in an impossible position. Ordered to hold bridgeheads against the advancing Americans, they no longer had confidence in what they were facing. Every engagement had become a lethal gamble.
Flash spotting proved most effective at night, though it could still function during daylight when sightlines were unobstructed. Aerial reconnaissance relied on small observation aircraft, typically Piper Cub L-4S, flown over the battlefield with an artillery officer serving as the observer. From this vantage, the officer could identify enemy guns as they fired, record their locations on maps, and relay precise coordinates directly to the fire direction centers. These lightweight planes flew at low altitudes and slow speeds, making them highly vulnerable to anti-aircraft fire. However, American P-47 fighter-bomber patrols generally kept German anti-aircraft positions suppressed. By mid-1944, the most sophisticated technology in use was counter-battery radar. The SCR-5A4 radar could track shells in mid-flight and calculate their trajectory backward, accurately determining the location of the firing gun. Radar was effective both day and night and could not be deceived by camouflage. Once a German shell was detected, the radar could transmit the gun's location to fire direction centers in roughly 90 seconds. Each method had inherent limitations. Sound ranging required suitable terrain and appropriate weather. Flash spotting needed clear lines of sight. Aerial observation depended on air superiority. Radar had a restricted range. Yet when combined, these techniques provided overlapping coverage. If one system failed, another often succeeded, and all contributed targeting information to the fire direction centers, which could then convert the data into concentrated artillery strikes within minutes. The Germans possessed comparable target acquisition tools. Their sound ranging teams were capable, and their aerial observers were skilled whenever they could get planes into the air. However, they lacked a fully integrated system linking detection to rapid, coordinated mass artillery fire, unlike the Americans.
Veterans consistently reported that learning about the Pershings represented a psychological breaking point. For 3 years, they had operated under the assumption of technical superiority. Even when outnumbered or retreating, they had confidence in the invincibility of Tigers. Discovering that Americans possessed tanks equal to or exceeding their own created a sense of hopelessness. The interrogations further revealed that many German crews had never actually faced a Pershing in combat. Yet the fear of them dictated nearly every tactical decision. The uncertainty, never knowing whether approaching tanks were Shermans or Pershings, proved as effective at paralyzing German armored units as actual combat. What German crews could not fully grasp until after the war was the scale of American heavy tank production by 1945. Although only 310 Pershings reached Europe before Germany surrendered, and only around 20 saw combat, American factories had produced over 2,200 M26 tanks by October 1945. Fisher Body's Grand Blanc arsenal alone manufactured 1,739 units, while Detroit Tank Arsenal and Chrysler contributed 473 tanks. Once fully converted, assembly lines could produce a Pershing in hours, a sharp contrast to the weeks required to complete a German Tiger. Over the entire war, Germany had produced only 1,347 Tiger I and 492 King Tigers.
A German sound-ranging team might detect an American artillery battery within 15 minutes, but organizing a counter-battery strike involving multiple battalions required an additional 30 to 40 minutes. By that time, the target had already relocated. The Americans, however, integrated all elements seamlessly. Their target acquisition units were in direct communication with both corps and divisional fire direction centers. Once a target was identified, it entered the system immediately. The Fire Direction Center assigned available batteries, computed firing solutions, and had shells striking the target within minutes of detection. An American pilot flying over the Italian front in 1944 reported calling in 5 separate corps-level fire missions in a single hour. These involved 5 distinct targets, each engaged by artillery from multiple divisions, all coordinated through fire direction centers capable of processing missions within minutes. This level of rapid responsiveness was unparalleled by any other army. In Normandy, the Americans enjoyed an additional advantage. The terrain was relatively compact, the front line concentrated, and American artillery forces were abundant. A typical American corps in Normandy maintained control over 8 to 12 artillery battalions, in addition to battalions directly assigned to divisions. All these battalions could engage targets anywhere along the corps front and could be massed against any target within minutes. German units in Normandy first encountered this system on D-Day itself. The 716th Static Infantry Division defended the Corps sector, covering Sword, Juno, Gold, and portions of Omaha Beach. Already weakened by transfers to the Eastern Front, the division numbered approximately 7,000 troops, far below its intended strength.
Unsure whether they faced easily destroyed Shermans or lethal Pershings. Post-war analysis revealed the depth of German intelligence failure. Despite extensive spy networks and signals intercepts, the Wehrmacht remained unaware of the Pershing program until these tanks appeared in combat. The failure extended beyond simply missing the development. German intelligence fundamentally underestimated American industrial capability. They knew the US produced large numbers of tanks but assumed this came at the cost of quality. They could not imagine that American factories could simultaneously produce heavy tanks while maintaining mass production efficiency. By April 1945, German armored resistance in the West had completely collapsed. Units still equipped with operational tanks often refused to confront American armor at all, paralyzed by the uncertainty and fear of encountering superior tanks.
Many of the soldiers were volunteers or conscripts from eastern regions of the Soviet Union. On June 6, the division's artillery units attempted to provide fire support for the beach defenses. In response, American and British naval guns unleashed devastating bombardments. When German batteries tried to fire from positions further inland, American artillery spotters, aided by Piper Cub observation planes, identified their locations within minutes. Counter-battery fire followed almost immediately. One notable German position at Resistance Point 62, manned by troops from both the 716th Static Infantry Division and the 352nd Infantry Division, came under concentrated fire. Coordinated artillery strikes targeted howitzer batteries situated approximately 5 kilometers inland at Huddville. Combined with fire from American destroyers, these counter-battery operations systematically suppressed German positions throughout the day. The 352nd Infantry Division, holding defensive lines near St. Lo and Corentin, had been deployed to Normandy by Rommel in March 1944 at full strength, numbering roughly 12,000 men. From the very first day of the invasion, the division's artillery regiment faced the full brunt of American counter-battery capabilities. Field Marshal Owen Rommel, commanding Army Group B, had anticipated before the invasion that Allied material superiority would prove decisive. In situation reports sent to the Commander-in-Chief West during early July 1944, Rommel explicitly highlighted the enemy's massive use of material, particularly artillery and tanks,
while confronting potentially equal American tanks promised only death. This pattern repeated along the front. German tank crews, once among the most determined fighters in the Wehrmacht, increasingly chose surrender. U.S. Army intelligence observed that by late April, captured German tank crews often reached collection points ahead of infantry from the same units, a stark reversal of previous behavior, where tank crews fought to the last. Even German units transferred from the Eastern Front, accustomed to facing Soviet tanks they could dominate, experienced severe psychological shock upon learning of American heavy tanks. These troops had arrived confident in their technological advantage, only to discover that it might no longer exist against U.S. forces.
His reports to headquarters detailed why an Allied breakthrough was unavoidable, highlighting the enemy's superiority in resources, supply lines, and air power, combined with significant German casualties. Rommel recognized that German artillery could not function effectively under constant surveillance from Allied aircraft and the rapid response of counter-battery fire. In post-war interrogations, German commanders repeatedly cited American artillery dominance as one of the decisive factors in the Normandy campaign. The 3rd Parachute Division reached Normandy from Brittany on June 10, 1944, at full strength, numbering approximately 15,976 troops. The division was tasked with defending the American left flank near the Wire River. Within weeks, its artillery units suffered severe losses due to relentless American counter-battery strikes. While precise daily casualty counts are not preserved in existing records, after-action reports from the division emphasized that American counter-battery fire arrived so swiftly that standard relocation procedures were rendered ineffective. During the engagement at Hill 192 outside St. Lo in July 1944, American artillery showcased the full potential of the Fire Direction Center system. The 2nd Infantry Division alone conducted up to 20 time-on-target missions each night, keeping German defenders in constant disruption. German prisoners consistently testified during interrogations about the extraordinary volume of American artillery fire they endured. On June 29, 1944, British forces launched Operation Epsom, a maneuver aimed at outflanking Caen from the west. In response, German High Command ordered a counteroffensive. The recently arrived 1st SS Panzer Division Leibstandard Adolf Hitler, transferred from the Eastern Front, was assembled for a counterattack directed toward Bourguebus Ridge.
The psychological impact on crews who had long believed in German technological supremacy was profound. During the final weeks of April 1945, the last engagements between German heavy tanks and American forces revealed a complete reversal of battlefield dominance. Where Tiger crews had once stalked Shermans with confidence, they now fought with desperation and hesitation. German doctrine dictated engaging the most dangerous threat first, yet uncertainty about the identity of approaching tanks, Shermans or Pershings, paralyzed decision-making. Crews hesitated, often losing crucial first-shot opportunities, a delay that proved fatal regardless of the actual type of American tank. Post-war analyses by military historians highlight the significance of the Pershing's psychological impact on German armored forces. Although the limited number of Pershings in combat complicates statistical analysis, the effect on German morale is well documented. Available data confirms this. In the 2 months prior to the Pershing's deployment, German tank units in the West maintained higher operational readiness despite material shortages. After reports of Pershing engagements spread, readiness declined markedly, with many losses attributed to crew abandonment rather than combat damage. German tank crews, long confident in their technological superiority, found that this belief could no longer sustain morale in the face of a credible American heavy tank threat.
The 9th and 10th SS Panzer Divisions operated west of the Orne River but were tied down by British diversionary maneuvers, specifically designed to prevent them from countering the main Allied assault. Coordinated American and British artillery, integrated through advanced fire direction centers, relentlessly pounded German assembly areas. As a result, the counterattack was delayed and repeatedly disrupted by the combined effects of artillery fire and RAF Hawker Typhoon rocket strikes. The offensive managed only minimal progress before being halted within 24 hours. This pattern was consistent throughout the Normandy campaign. German commanders attempting to concentrate forces for counteroffensives repeatedly discovered their assembly zones under devastating artillery bombardment before any attack could commence. Field Marshal Gerd von Rundstedt, the Commander-in-Chief West, formally requested substantial reinforcements in artillery and counter-battery capabilities. These reinforcements, however, never materialized. By late July 1944, during the American breakout from Normandy, German artillery resistance was described in U.S. after-action reports as minimal to virtually non-existent. While German units still possessed guns, they were effectively neutralized, unable to operate without being destroyed by American counter-battery fire within minutes. General Feldmarschall Gerd von Rundstedt, in his evaluations of Allied naval gunfire during the Cherbourg operations, praised its efficiency and flexibility. He noted that support ranged from battleships to gunboats, providing highly mobile, continuously available artillery assistance to ground forces.
The production infrastructure told the full story. By April 1945, American tank production facilities spanned over 50 million square feet. The Detroit tank arsenal alone exceeded much of the German tank production network. Fisher Body Division had converted entire automobile plants to tank production in mere months, a feat German industry never achieved. Beyond tactical and technical consequences, the Pershing created a profound moral crisis for German tank crews. They had been taught that they were fighting for German technological and racial superiority. The appearance of superior American tanks, built by what Nazi propaganda derisively called mongrel races, directly challenged the ideological foundation of their struggle. This cognitive dissonance was particularly acute for Waffen-SS tank crews, who had been selected for ideological reliability and had fully embraced Nazi racial theories as justification for their actions. The existence of the Pershing undermined their entire worldview. If Americans could build superior tanks, what did that imply about notions of racial superiority? The overall impact of the Pershing was complex. A total of 310 Pershings reached Europe before Germany's surrender, but only about 20 saw actual combat. This limited deployment makes statistical claims regarding kill ratios largely irrelevant. What truly mattered was not the number of German tanks destroyed by Pershings, but the psychological effect their mere existence imposed on German morale and tactical decision-making. German records indicate a marked increase in tank abandonments in sectors where Pershings were rumored to operate, demonstrating that the perception of the tank alone was enough to paralyze resistance.
German military journals reported that Allied naval bombardments acted as one of their most decisive advantages, providing highly accurate fire during critical situations and maintaining sustained pressure on targets, effectively serving as floating artillery. During the Okinawa campaign in April 1945, Japanese forces encountered a similar American counter-battery system. Having studied German reports from Normandy, the Japanese adopted extreme shoot-and-scoot tactics. Their batteries would fire 2 or 3 rounds, then immediately abandon their positions, retreating to underground tunnels or caves. In some cases, guns were intentionally left behind as decoys. The Japanese were fully aware that American counter-battery fire could arrive within minutes, so they ensured that no personnel remained near the guns when shells struck. American sound-ranging units on Okinawa were able to pinpoint Japanese gun positions within 5 minutes of firing. Counter-battery fire struck those positions within 9 minutes of initial detection. However, when U.S. forces assaulted these sites, they frequently found guns abandoned and bunkers empty. In response, the Americans adapted their approach. Instead of aiming to destroy enemy guns outright, counter-battery fire was used to suppress them. Whenever a Japanese battery fired, American artillery pounded the location for 30 minutes, preventing crews from returning to service the weapon. This allowed U.S. infantry and armored units to advance while enemy artillery remained neutralized. Over the course of the Okinawa campaign, American artillery fired more than 3 million rounds over 82 days of combat. This amounted to an average of 36,000 rounds per day, more ammunition than some European nations expended over the entirety of World War II. Although the placard describes them as roughly equivalent in technical capability, it does not convey the psychological transformation the American tank triggered. German veterans visiting these exhibits frequently recalled the shock they felt upon learning what American heavy tanks were capable of. To them, the Pershing represented more than just a machine. It symbolized American industrial might finally directed toward matching German quality while still producing equipment in overwhelming numbers. The full impact of the Pershing becomes clear when examining the verified figures that reflect the psychological nature of this confrontation. German tank crew morale dropped significantly after reports of American heavy tanks circulated. Only about 20 Pershings ever saw actual combat, making any claim regarding kill ratios statistically useless. Yet 310 Pershings reached Europe before victory in Europe Day, and by October 1945 the United States had produced a total of 2,202 M26 tanks. By comparison, Germany produced just 1,347 Tiger I tanks and 492 King Tigers throughout the entire war. Fisher Body alone manufactured 1,739 Pershings, while Chrysler contributed another 473. These numbers make the truth clear: the Pershing's psychological impact vastly outweighed its limited battlefield appearances. The realization that America could mass-produce heavy tanks while Germany struggled merely to keep existing vehicles operational proved just as demoralizing as any defeat in combat.